Well, good evening everyone. My name is Doug Chipman. I'm Mayor of the City of Clarence. It's my pleasure to welcome you all to tonight's council meeting. Could I ask those present to please join me by standing for the council prayer. Almighty God, we humbly beseech Thee to vouchsafe Thy blessing upon this council. Direct and prosper its deliberations to the achievement of Thy glory and the true welfare of the people of the City of Clarence. Amen. I'd like to acknowledge the Tasmanian Aboriginal people as the traditional custodians of the land that we're meeting on tonight, pay respect to their elders past and present, and also recognise their continuing spiritual connection to the land. Thank you. I'd like to especially welcome those members of the public who are able to join us tonight in the chamber. COVID restrictions are still in place, so only a maximum of 12 people can, by prior booking, attend in the public gallery, so it's good to see you here. I do need to remind all present that the meeting is being broadcast live on YouTube and that what is said at this meeting is not protected by privilege. The link and the agenda papers are available on Council's website. Also tonight, we're trialling a new audio-visual system which hopefully will provide a much better audio experience in the public gallery and a far more professional online production. Speakers are reminded that the cameras will automatically focus specifically on them while they are speaking. So to the business on the agenda, first of all, we have no apologies. I have one declaration of interest from Alderman Chong for item 9.2. Are there any other declarations of interest? Thank you. Moving now to the starred items, and we'll deal with those as an omnibus item. Firstly, the confirmation of the minutes for the 9th of August 2021 as circulated be taken as read and confirmed. Are there any questions with the minutes? Thank you. Mayor's communication, I'd simply like to table the Mayor's diary entries for the previous period along with other representative duties carried out by Deputy Mayor and Alderman. Item 4 is that Council notes the workshops conducted on the 16th and 23rd of August and the agenda briefing on the 27th of August. Tabling of petitions, I believe we have one, General Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. We have one petition of 33 signatories requesting an immediate opportunity for consultation regarding the barriers erected at the access point of Longview and Seamist Walks, and that any works be halted until a reasonable opportunity for consultation occurs. It's a complying petition, Mayor, and we will provide a report on that petition to the next meeting.
Thank you. Are there any other petitions? Thank you. Moving on to reports from outside bodies. Firstly, the Copping Refuse Disposal Site Joint Authority. I note the June quarter report still outstanding.
Imminent, yeah.
Thank you. Any other report? Tasmanian Water Corporation, there's nothing to report there. Under the Greater Hobart Committee, we had a meeting on the 18th of August, and included in the agenda papers are the communique and the 2015 vision for Greater Hobart, which has been signed off now by the committee. Reports from Council and other special committees. Are there any reports? Alderman Chong.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Can I table the quarterly minutes of the Clarence Cultural History Advisory Committee, the Youth Advisory Committee, and also the minutes of the Richmond Advisory Committee and the Richmond Bicentennial Committee meeting.
You have been busy.
I have.
Are there any other reports? Alderman Bonberto.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Mr Mayor, as the aldermanic representative on the Clarence City Band Committee, which is a special committee of council under the Local Government Act, I'd like to thank the committee members for the huge amount of work that they did to organise the gala concert, which was held on the 14th of August and which you and I attended. It's a pity that some of the other members of the council were not able to attend, because it was a brilliant night with absolutely amazing music. There were 11 bands and ensembles altogether, right from beginners through to experienced players. It was actually held at the Greek Club in North Hobart, because unfortunately Rosny College, where it's usually held, was unavailable because of COVID restrictions. And it does highlight the need in Clarence for a civic arts and cultural centre. And the Mayor actually noted that when he gave his speech at the performance. And I thank you very much for doing that.
Thanks, Alderman Bombett.
And also the Mayor provided a letter to the President of the committee. So I also thank you for that.
Thank you. Any other reports? Item 11.1, the weekly briefing reports that the information contained in the ones for the 9th, 16th and 23rd of August be noted. Any questions on those? In that case, I'll call for a motion that for all the start items we endorse the officer's recommendations. Thanks, Alderman Pearce. Do I have a seconder, please? Oh, Alderman Warren, thank you. All those in favour? Carried unanimously, thank you. Back to item 7, public question time. We have 2 questions on notice which are in the agenda, so I propose that they be taken as read, but I'll ask the GM if we have answers to those questions, please.
Thank you, Mayor. The first question is from Mr Bradley Walker, and as you said, the question is in the agenda, so while you'll leave, I'll just read the answer if that's okay. In relation to an application to amend a sealed plan, Local Government Building and Miscellaneous Provisions Act provides that only parties that have an estate or interest at law, that is as an owner or a mortgagee, in relation to a sealed plan are to be notified of the application to amend. Council does not have a role under the Act to notify other parties of an applicant's application to amend a sealed plan and cannot go beyond its statutory role. The obligation to notify rests with the applicant and only requires the applicant to notify those parties who have an estate or interest in that application. In respect to the particular plan notified, owners in the locality who were not a party to the sealed plan and therefore not entitled to be heard were incorrectly told that they were entitled to be heard by a third party. Unfortunately, that caused confusion that Council was required to address.
Thank you. Second one from Denise Hogan.
Thank you, Mayor. The second question is from Denise Hogan of Rosny, and I might ask Mr Lovell if he would like to respond to that.
Thank you, Mr Lovell.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I'll just read the answer, if I may. On the 25th of June 2021, the Tasmanian Planning Commission advised Council that it had determined that modifications were required to the draft LPS. 8 modifications were considered substantial and itemised in the attachment to the letter. A copy of the letter and associated decision is available on the Commission's website. It's understood that the Commission has already advised representatives of those modifications, which concern the zoning, overlay or controls of the following. The first is Lindisfarne Ridge Flagstaff Gully zoning. Second is Harrow Hills zoning. Third is Rosny Hill Nature Recreation Area zoning. Fourth is Railway and Railway Assets Code for the Road or Railway Attenuation Area Overlay. Fifth is Natural Assets Code, being the Waterway and Coastal Protection Area Overlay. The sixth is the Flood-Prone Areas Hazard Code. The seventh is Potentially Contaminated Land Code, and the 8th is the Safeguarding of Airports Code for the Cambridge Airport. Following amendments to the Land Use Planning Approvals Act 1993, on the 29th of July 2021, the Commission advised that it intended to issue a notice on the 1st of September 2021 that will override the requirement to re-exhibit the substantial modifications under the former process. Instead, a modified version of the draft LPS will be approved and the 8 substantial modifications will be converted into future amendments and subject to the statutory process specified under the Act, which will include public exhibition. The Commission has since advised that on the 1st of September its decision and notice will be published on its website and that all representors will be notified. If any representors have queries on this, they are invited to contact the Commission directly.
Thank you. In the agenda papers, there's one answer to a previous question on taken on notice, so we'll assume that that's taken as read as well. It's in the agenda. 7.4, questions without notice. I understand there are two, General Manager.
Thank you. We have one question without notice from Mrs Joanne Marsh of Belrive. The question is, on some parts of the Victoria Esplanade shared pathway, I need to move myself and my greyhound off the path when bikes are approaching because of plants encroaching onto the pathway. There is also wood chip mulch strewn all over the pathway on a narrower part of the path near the public pier. Older pedestrians and people with disabilities are made vulnerable by these nuisances. When is the next check by the maintenance crew scheduled for this pathway to ensure that it is safe and amenable for all users? If it is not due soon, could an unscheduled maintenance check be conducted? With your leave, Mayor, I might ask Mr Graham if you'd like to respond.
Thank you.
Through you, Mr Mayor, by chance our crew was scheduled today to attend to that area, so they will have at 10, and then they will do a review of the actual works, whether it's answered or addressed the person's concerns, and then might have to reschedule another period later on at the time when the crew's available.
Thank you. There's a second one.
Thank you, Mayor. The second question tonight is from Mr Victor Marsh, who I believe is in attendance.
My name is Victor Marsh, I live 32A King Street, Belrive. The recent stage in the upgrading of the Belrive Beach Regional Park, costing over $600,000, has just been completed. On the 31st of August 2020, Joanne Marsh asked a question without notice about the extensive pooling of water on pathways and park surfaces along the length of the park after heavy rain. A council officer said in response, the proposed levels of the new pathway and adjacent additions to the existing parkland will contour surface runoff towards the new stormwater pits to help manage the issues of pooling water. I believe that this response was misleading, because on the 16th of August 2021, after heavy rain, the disappearing tarn beside the pathway leading from the playground to the toilets returned worse than ever. So my question is, when is the Clarence City Council going to manage stormwater competently and fix this embarrassing mess?
Mr Graham, are you in a position to answer that, or you need to take it on notice?
I will take that one on notice, thanks Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Mr Marsh. Is that all the questions? Okay, moving on then to motions on notice. At this stage I'd like to hand the chair to the Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. Alderman Chin. Motion 9.1. Notice of motion. Right?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I must admit it feels good to be back on the floor in this august chamber and be exercising my privileges as an alderman. I'd like to move the motion on the agenda with several changes shown in red on the screen.
Could I just see if there's a seconder, please?
Beg your pardon?
Yes. I was just looking for a seconder before you continue with it.
I'm happy to request a second.
Yeah.
I did want to explain what was being moved.
Okay.
Oh, best can do.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Whichever.
Best can go.
Yeah.
Thank you, Alderman Warren.
Sorry.
The changes emerged from our agenda briefing on Friday and include a priority for the report, anonymity of the input, the report to be as open to the public as possible, and a cap on the cost. In essence, this motion is asking Council to commission a review of its own workplace. My motivation stems from our debate about anger management at our last Council meeting, in which many of us, if not all, expressed concerns about the work environment in which we perform our duties as an alderman. We know that getting elected to office at any level of government is a highly competitive process, as is the contest for ideas, policies and projects once we're in the chamber after we've been elected. We all expect and are prepared for that. The concern is that at times our behaviour extends beyond our expectations and that the existing code of conduct procedures are inadequate. Our concern is, of course, not peculiar to Clarence, and we were pleased to support Hobart City Council's motion at the last LGAT meeting that the State Government commission a sector-wide review, like it commissioned the review for the Parliamentary Services Division. The Government's response was that it would be willing to support such a review, but it should be commissioned by Tasmanian mayors and LGAT, a process which I'm sure you would agree could take some considerable time. The tenor of the debate at our last meeting suggested we needed to proceed more quickly. Furthermore, we need to understand our obligations under the Anti-Discrimination Act and the Work Health and Safety Act to respond to the Director of Local Government's request that we advise him whether we would be supportive of developing a workplace equality and respect statement of intent to be signed by all aldermen. My proposed review will help inform us on the issues around taking such a step. Employees at Clarence City Council are already required to comply with the workplace behaviour and code of conduct policies, as well as the work health and safety procedures. The General Manager holds the statutory position of a person conducting a business or undertaking. Aldermen are not council employees, so our obligations under the Act are not well defined. Yet clearly, we impact considerably on the workplace of those council staff who interact with us on a regular basis, as we impact on each other. In conclusion, as a well-resourced and large Tasmanian council, we have the capacity to be a sector leader in terms of understanding our obligations under both Acts. An appraisal of our culture with informed recommendations will be a positive step in that direction. I commend the motion.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Look, there's nothing unusual about this. This is something that's happening at the federal level, the state level, and now, thank you, at local government level. And I endorse the Mayor's comments about the Director of Local Government, who has requested that we conduct a review and allow us to to develop a workplace equality and respect statement of intent that can be agreed to by all councillors. Look, we've got nothing to lose by this. It may come back the review says we're all doing a fine job, or it may come back that there are areas that we can improve on, and I'm sure that everyone would be willing to do that because we always seek for a continuous improvement. For anyone who's concerned about the cost, that would be roughly equivalent to 4 code of conduct matters taken to the code of conduct panel. By doing this review, we may avoid future costs of code of conduct because we can work better together. So I think that it's a positive step. Hopefully it allows us to do a bit of a reset and to work better together from now on. So I commend the motion.
Thank you, Alderman White. Other speakers? Alderman James.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. May I say from the outset that this really is something that could be determined by fair-minded and I think people who have a reasonable degree of understanding of the process. And this very question of having an independent person suitably qualified and experienced in work, health and safety. And what's interesting is that this particular review would canvass representatives, elected representatives in this place, and senior staff as well as, and a confidential report where appropriate. Now, why is it necessary to have a confidential report when in fact the members around this chamber can in fact speak openly, frankly, and exercise a fair degree of decorum when they are speaking and addressing other members in the chamber? So why is it necessary to spend ratepayers' money, $25,000, when in fact that $25,000 could be spent on more worthwhile projects, and by the very nature of being able to provide something which the community could say was in relation to what the elected representatives can in this place decide. I don't think this is necessary. In fact, at the Local Government Association meeting recently, the member council supported a call for the state government to commission a review of workplace health and safety for the elected representatives. And this was something that was carried by the other member councils, and it was decided in fact that this is the way it ought to go. I don't think this is necessary. In fact, it's sort of flagging the sense that there is some needs to have this sort of, and I use these words very carefully, a Clarence Inquisition in relation to what it decides to do in relation to reviewing and also looking at the workplace and what the elected representatives should do. I have always been of the view that there is a difference between the administrative arm of this council and the executive arm of this council. And we need to work together, and the officers have that technical expertise to provide to us. But by having this particular committee, this sort of review committee, and which would incorporate elected representatives and senior staff to deliver a report, confidential where appropriate, in my view, does nothing in order to be able to deliver to the City of Clarence a frank and open discussion, and where the behaviour of our members, whether it's in this place or in any other council, we can decide to speak carefully and consider other people's comments and decide it within the debate. I will not be supporting this because I'm against any clandestine sort of review which may put at odds a lot of the members of this place as well as the staff, but more importantly, the $20,000 could be well spent on other services which would be in the benefit of the community. I will oppose this motion.
Thank you, Alderman James. I'm sure Alderman Chipple will pick up the confidentiality issue in his right of reply. Any other speakers? Alderman Edmonds?
Sure, just briefly. I think excuse me, I think this is necessary. We discussed this 3 weeks ago in the anger management motion about some of the goings-on in this chamber, in our workshops, in other sort of dealings with each other electronically or via phone or in committee meetings. Key words for me, and actually before I say that, I thank the Mayor for stepping up to actually move this in light of that debate, not having a pathway forward and having a constructive way forward to actually have something looked at here. I also, while I'm at it, might as well add my thanks for taking the feedback on in such good nature as it was provided, and I think we've got a better motion as a result of that. The key word for me up there is the end of point 1. Advisors counsel on any actions needed to promote a safe and respectful workplace for all participants, and particularly the last bit, a safe and respectful workplace. I would argue that we don't have a safe and respectful workplace at all times for all participants here, and I think, while I understand a little bit of what the previous speaker said about this not being necessary, I think this is our pathway forward. It's equipped with a broad enough but narrow enough scope to look at things that have happened and probably to foresee issues that might come into the future. It is sad that we sort of are spending time when we've got people here for the actual operations of council, which is, our planning authority, etc., that we're doing this navel gazing, but it's worth it for the pathway that we might be on, because I think the pathway could get a lot uglier, and I don't think any of us want to see that. So here it is. It's a line in the sand to buck up our ideas and then to think about how we can move forward as a council, sort out our culture and promote a safe and respectful workplace for people. Because, we have debates, but, you can be on the different side of an argument and still talk to each other, or you can be on a different side of an argument and decide not to. That's my brief, noteless contribution, just to say that I think this is necessary. I think it is a pathway forward for us to be a better functioning council, and it has my support. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Edmonds. Alderman Yeaton.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Look, when I first saw the motion from the Mayor, I was reluctant to support it. I'm more comfortable with some of the amendments that have been made. I mean, certainly the cost is a concern to me, but the other one, the involvement of senior staff in terms of the ability to have confidential conversation with whoever is determined how this operates, I'm supportive of. I know Alderman Von Bordeaux also raised a few other issues that I was concerned about as well in relation to what's it going to say, how's it going to be used, how we're going to know what it's about, how much of it's confidential. And there's still a few grey areas there that I'm a bit concerned about. But look, getting better at something is, certainly in business, it's something you've got to think about and try and do every day. And I think it's something that we should be also doing as well. I disagree with some of the comments around the room about us not having a safe workplace. I totally disagree with that. It's a contest of ideas. I've never seen any behaviour in the chamber that I thought was bordering anywhere near something that I would consider, way out of line. And I mean, you've got to be able to have those debates. We're not going to walk out and be best buddies, and but that's life. I mean, we're different people. And I just, the continual sort of wanting to put us down as a group or us as a council down is a concern to me, and that's something that I wish we didn't always seem to be so quick to do. I mean, the thing about this is that, it started off as an anger management debate, which was totally ill-conceived and I thought totally inappropriate way to approach this issue. Finding ways to actually make better decisions and be able to deal with situations when you don't get your way, more than happy to have that discussion, but that's really where this starts and finishes. I mean, it's not a health and safety issue as such. I'm happy to look at ways of helping us to make those decisions and portray ourselves in a more positive light at times, but I mean, I don't think the community the community doesn't agree on everything, so how are we going to all agree on everything all of the time? But, I'm happy to support this one. I think the Mayor's on the front foot. There seems to be a desire amongst, more likely the majority of my colleagues, to at least address this in some way, and I certainly think it's a far better motion than we had last meeting, and it's certainly a better motion than what was put up originally. I'd like to think that, having the staff involved, because I think they're the ones at times that get frustrated with some of the things that go on inside the chamber and outside the chamber, and some of the, I've said it before, some of the politicking that goes on at times. And I think that if we focus a little bit more on the needs of our local community and the things that are really important to them, I think that's 99% of the way there in terms of doing what we're elected here to do. So I'll be supporting this one. It's a lot better than what we had in the past. But I also do share some of Alderman James's concerns about the cost. And once again, this trying to over-regulate things and come up with a policy that all of a sudden makes us get on and agree. And, I don't know, it's a bit of a utopia. I don't know whether we can go, but I mean, I'm happy to give it a try. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Newton. Any other speakers? Alderman Kennedy.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. And I'd really like to thank the Mayor for this motion and for listening to a number of us, in fact 6 of us, that supported Alderman Mulder's motion recently. Maybe it is utopia, but I would love this council to develop a respectful working environment. Something that I've made a note of here that I wasn't going to add, but it might just, when we talk about community and how we're perceived, and we talk about being community leaders. Recently I was made aware of a highlights reel, or maybe a lowlights reel, of edited cuts from this council in action. Now, it would seem the comment of community leaders continues to be intercut with angry and aggressive outbursts. Apparently its working title is Toxic, not to be confused with Richard Flanagan's book. Yes, it's called Toxic, The Darkest Hours of Clarence Council. Surely we can be better than this and have our ratepayers noticing the work, the great work, not just that we do, but the staff do in our community, how we collectively strive to do the very best for our community. We don't want people just focusing on the bad stuff that is recorded that people see. And I'm sorry, you know, we won't always agree, but I feel very strongly about this. So let's not have any more embarrassing moments. Let's let the community see what we really can do, what we do, and just get on with it. Of course, you have my support, and I thank you for listening. Mayor.
Thank you, Alderman Kennedy. Any other speakers? Alderman Walker.
Thank you. Look, I do support this motion. It has been diligently drafted. It was circulated early to Aldermen for insight, and it was refined after that input. And I believe once completed, the value is that we'll be in a better shape to retain good people around the table, and hopefully also amongst the officers and wider staff. And I would hope that also in a better position to have a wider pool of good people putting their hand up to sit around this table, probably in October next year. Yeah, I found this term different to the last one, to put it mildly, as far as decorum goes. Although through the COVID challenges of the 2020 budget, we had some profound creative differences, but I think we handled that well. I think we did a good job. I think we benchmark well against other local governments in that space. And there's always room to do better, but we shouldn't be blind to a lot of the things that are being done right. There have been comments made around the resourcing, and it's real. It's not small money. But I look at it through this prism. I think what we are trying to do is make a down payment, a form of an insurance policy, or as we say in the sector I work in, that you know, an ounce of prevention's worth a pound of cure. And if you see how dysfunctional some councils can get, and how some of our colleagues not far from here and other councils, how they fast track themselves to administration, the costs associated with that should be borne in mind compared to and put into the context of what's being asked here. So, as I said, I do support it. Yes, I also note through you, Deputy Mayor, the comments of Alderman Edmonds around navel gazing, and there's a discomfort and feeling that there's an element of that. But that's why starting this now, getting this train underway as soon as possible, means that we can just focus on the main job around us and get to a point where you know, the focus gets on the decisions made rather than the deliberations in workshops, or again around the chamber. So yeah, I endorse this motion.
Thank you, Alderman Walker. Alderman Puerto.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Deputy Mayor, I won't be supporting this motion, and the reason why I won't be supporting it is that I do not believe we are at the appropriate stage to have this review. And the reason why I say that is I refer to the correspondence that we received from the Director of Local Government on the 14th of July and the 4th of August this year. In that correspondence, he actually notes a number of matters. One of the matters that he asks for Council to consider is the development of a workplace equality and respect statement of intent that would be signed by all councillors. I'm sure you're all aware that a workplace equality and respect statement of intent actually refers to matters related to gender equity and to sexual harassment in particular. I'm certainly supportive of developing such a statement of intent. And obviously I go on record to note that. The second thing that he actually covers in his letter of the 4th of August is the independent review into the Tasmanian parliamentary practices and procedures and the reference to such a review or a similar review at a local government level. And as the Mayor has noted, he actually suggests that the Mayors and the Local Government Association of Tasmania should sponsor such a review with the support of the government. My understanding is that Clarence City Council, as a base rate, actually pays about $70,000 in membership to Legat. That's what we've paid this year. And I actually believe that we should start at that level and be involved in that review. And my understanding from the General Manager is that we may have to pay a little bit extra. I don't understand why, because I think that 70-odd thousand is quite a large amount of money and should actually cover such a review. However, I actually feel that we need to look at this issue at that level first. And that particular review should have very clear terms of reference, as does the state government one. At the moment, the motion before us has no terms of reference or very limited terms of reference, and that concerns me. It concerns me in relation to the confidentiality aspect, because I actually believe that to have trust and to be frank in such a review requires confidentiality. Some of the matters that have been touched on by other aldermen relate to behaviour within this council, and therefore I actually believe this is an internal review that needs to start out being confidential. Perhaps at some point we may actually release some information, but certainly not at the beginning. And the other aspect that the Director of Local Government covers is that the sector needs to understand its legislative responsibilities in the work environment. So I believe that we actually need to have some training in that respect before we start to consider, at some point perhaps in the future, such a specific review of Clarence City Council. Thank you.
Any other speakers? Alderman Pearce.
No, thank you, Deputy Mayor. I totally support this recommendation. I could say a hell of a lot, but I won't. I'll hold a lot back because I think this is the right way to go. I can see some people think it's a lot of work, and I actually, from the last conference, I actually was talking to the General Manager, and I believe after every election we should be given a workshop on our attitude and what is expected of each other, and also on the law. We know what we're doing as aldermen, but also there are different things that were raised at the conference that we should know that comes into the law. But I think this motion is good. We're always not going to agree in council, and I totally agree with that. I understand a bit of, people are passionate, and that's not my worry. That's what we want, a bit of passion in the place and, good debate. But when we leave this room, I cannot understand why there's angst and everything else. There should not be yelling and screaming in this room. We should debate issues, get the result. Look, I can tell you I've left this room and lost every item I spoke for, and vice versa. I've won every item I spoke for. So, these are things that happens along your way as an alderman. One of the things that annoys me, you've got to put up a lot from even ratepayers, sometimes abusive emails. We understand that, but I don't expect it from my own colleagues because, one night I could disagree with you, next meeting I totally agree with you. So I think this is a good start. I really think it's needed. I'm glad the officers are involved because sometimes they're not spoken to with the respect they should be either. So I think that's a great way to start as well. Maybe confidential where appropriate, I don't know. Look, I just want us all to work together. We're all not going to agree, we know that. But, geez, I think this is a great way to start and get things moving.
Thank you, Alderman Pearce. Other speakers? If no, then Alderman Chipman, right to reply.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A couple of things come out of that. First of all, and in no particular order, it was said that it could be determined by a fair amount of people working together that we should be able to come up with an amenable working environment. Clearly that hasn't happened. The debate last council meeting demonstrated that there are things that we need to fix. It's been suggested that we defer to government and LGAT and that, for example, we already pay a substantial membership fee there, but this would be extra. We get a lot of services for that fee that we paid. Indeed, we actually make some income out of it as well through the purchasing policy. So, but this is an extra task that if LGAT take on that does need to be funded, of course. I think too that if the confidentiality aspects were raised, I imagine and I expect that the consultant will consult individually with aldermen and senior staff, will have the wherewithal to put together a report. There may be some sensitive parts to it which actually need to remain confidential. Others are quite open, particularly the way forward. I think that should be shareable with the public. But the bottom line is if we want to review it, we're better off controlling it ourselves. It's not being run by a committee. It's an independent consultant reporting to us as councillors. Initially, it would be a workshop before coming to a council meeting. So I commend the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Chipman. I put the motion, the review of elected members' workplace environment as shown on the screen with amendments. All those in favour? Those against? The motion is carried.
Thank you. Motions on notice 9.2. Alderman Evans.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I actually have an amendment to the motion, which I apologise for the late nature of today's... well, it's not unprecedented. The nature of today's working environment, just there's a slight tweaks which I can pass over, but the new motion is that LGAT lobby the state government to investigate, which is the change, so consider to investigate, amending the Land Use Planning Approvals Act 1993 to provide alternative mechanisms for consideration of development applications submitted by elected members as a means to removing any perception of bias or conflict of interest. Adding a new sentence, the investigation shall provide pros and cons of any alternate solutions.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder, please? Alderman Walker, thank you.
Point of order, Mr Mayor. We need a copy of that.
Yes, it's fair enough too.
And I actually believe that we need to stop the meeting and that is actually provided to us before we continue.
Look, I'll go part of the way. Alderman Evans, we might come back to your motion in the meantime, if it's possible to get a photocopy of that circulated to all the aldermen. And
context, it was either move this motion and then accept the amendment, or move the amendment so that the seconder came in with their eyes wide open on it. So I took the option of everyone being best informed.
I'm happy to come back to it if we can get
No problem.
copy of the variation circulated, please. So if I could now move to item 9.3, Alderman Mulder. Thanks. We're going to revisit that motion a little bit later, so there'll be another opportunity for you to... 9.3, Alderman Mulder.
Mr Mayor, I move an alternative version of that motion that appears there. Correct one appears there now. That elected members of Clarence Council be encouraged to demonstrate community leadership by publicly declaring their COVID vaccination status and intentions.
Do I have a seconder, please? Alderman Warren, thank you. Alderman Mulder.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This motion is as simple as it sounds. And I declare that I will be fully vaccinated by September the 20th and call on my fellow aldermen to make a similar declaration. High vaccination rates are the key to no more lockdowns and the economic recovery so vital to the nation. Yet vaccine hesitancy is causing Tasmania, once a leader, to fall behind the mainland vaccination rates. In the United States, President Biden boldly declares COVID to be an epidemic of the unvaccinated, and a vaccination passport is now a condition of easing restrictions in New South Wales. Virgin Airlines has joined Qantas in announcing mandatory vaccinations for employees under their duty of care to have safe workplaces. An interesting proposition, Mr Mayor, given your previous motion. Even in the land of the free, President Biden, as Commander-in-Chief of the United States, requires all military personnel to be vaccinated. Atlantic Airlines is following suit, but I note with some irony that Delta Airlines has yet to make an announcement. Even former President Trump is arguing mass vaccinations. Well, that was yesterday. We're not sure what it will be tomorrow. Mr Mayor, I will have my second shot on September the 20th. As local community leaders, I encourage my colleagues to use this opportunity to declare their vaccine status. And I note that as late as this afternoon, and I thank Alderman Warren for organising a photo shoot, and I would encourage those members of this chamber to attend that as well.
Thank you. Alderman Warren.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I need to start by declaring that my day job is as the Assistant Director of the Tasmanian Vaccination Rollout, so I have a particularly strong interest in this. I would propose that the debate tonight should not be about the pros and cons of vaccination. There's plenty of good information out there and reliable resources for people who want to know more about that. I propose that the debate should purely be about whether we can add to the debate by demonstrating leadership. I thought long and hard about this. Certainly as the campaign for vaccination, we are relying heavily on leaders in the community and people who are influencers. I don't know whether Clarence City Aldermen are influencers, but I think it's a good statement. It's being made at the state level. All the MPs who've had vaccination are proudly displaying that through social media. I think it would be a positive thing for us to say, as a council, we think this is important. The slogan is "Don't wait, vaccinate," and to say we've been vaccinated and we encourage the people of Clarence to do likewise. And that's really all I want to say on this, except that I have to pick Alderman Mulder up on one statistic. Until recently, Tasmania was ahead of all the other jurisdictions on the percentage of people vaccinated. We've now fallen to third place on first vaccinations, notably behind New South Wales, because they've done a terrific job of vaccinating anybody who moved over the last couple of weeks. But we are still first on the population fully vaccinated. We have the highest percentage. I can't tell you off the top of my head. It was 44 point something, I think, as of today. So we are doing very well as a community, but there is a lot more to do. We hope to have everyone fully vaccinated. Sorry, everyone. 65% of people fully vaccinated by the end of September, so that we will be on track to be able to open up when we reach that 70 or 80% mark round about the end of October. But it does rely on everybody doing their bit. So I think for us to stand as a council and say, we think this is important, we've been vaccinated, and which is why I suggested to Alderman Mulder that we do in fact have a photo opportunity that allows us to reach a wider audience with that message.
Thank you. Other speakers? Alderman James.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and I know Alderman Warren is quite concerned, and in her role is very important as part of promoting and making sure that the Tasmanian community is well versed and it's advertised far and wide in relation to the matter of having their COVID vaccination done accordingly. And I know my colleagues may say, where is he coming from this particular stance? It is by the very nature of the motion in which it says that elected members of Clarence Council be encouraged to demonstrate community leadership. Now, community leadership, in my view, goes a long way in making, that you are working on behalf of the community. But where you have to basically demonstrate to the community and declaring your state of play in relation to COVID vaccination, I take exception to that. There are people in the community out there, and for their reasons, right or wrong, they are, and I have spoken with them and I've explained to them that I'm looking forward, and I've said it to Alderman Warren, when can I get my booster shot? Because I've had my shots. But at the same time, by the very nature of demonstrating, and that's the word I really take exception to, demonstrate to the community by saying you should, by declaring their vaccination and intentions, by the very nature of that, is saying that you ought to. Now, I may be drawing a long bow here, but by the very nature of declaring and demonstrating, you are really going to not encourage other people to come forward and vaccinate, but you may have them starting to wonder as to why a group of individuals is basically telling them that they ought to go and have their COVID vaccination. I would rather do it, and I've been doing it, by saying to people that I've got my first shot, second shot, flu shot, booster shot forthcoming, rather than being in a picture or a photo shoot and therefore standing in line and saying this is what we expect you to do in the community. I know it can be interpreted like that this is what we expect you to do, is to go out and get vaccinated. I understand, Alderman Warren, I understand a number of the people around this table.
You're speaking to the Mayor, please, the Chair.
Yes, I am speaking to the Mayor. Yes, I am speaking to the Mayor. Thank you for interrupting me, Mr Mayor. So my reason for this is that I think we can do this publicity process by just working in the community. And unfortunately, through you, Mr Mayor, Alderman Warren, I don't feel that I would like to participate.
Alderman James, you cannot speak to an alderman in the debate. You need to speak to the Chair and reference subjects on the topic to the Chair.
Well, okay. That's the second time you've sort of...
the second time I've had to. I hope I don't have to again, Alderman James.
Well, I know, Mr Mayor, and perhaps what I'm saying doesn't really go down very well. Anyway, nevertheless, I think you've interrupted me and you've basically stopped me in my tracks, so thank you for that.
and I will not be supporting the motion.
Thank you, Alderman James. Alderman Chong and then Alderman Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. In one of my other roles in life as Rotary District Governor, I spent 4 hours on Saturday at one of the vaccination clinics that were being held in MAC2 over the weekend. And it was amazing how many people who were sometimes a little bit nervous about getting the vaccination asked the Rotarians that were there, have you had your vaccination? And we all, without exception, could say yes, at least one. And it was incredible how comforting and people found that, because they knew that we weren't just there talking at them, we'd actually done this ourselves. So I think it's really important that as Clarence Alderman, that we show leadership, that we actually do this and make public the fact that we support vaccinations. And I will obviously be supporting the motion.
Alderman Kennedy.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. The only thing I wanted to touch on briefly is obviously there's statewide and national media campaigns using well-known identities to actually push the vax. I think Grace Tame's ads have just aired over the last couple of days, so it's no mistake that people that are well-known or perceived as community leaders that are being chosen to spread the word. So, yes, I'll be supporting the motion. Thank you.
Yeah. Alderman Ewington.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, first thing I've noticed, I mean, when I read the first attempt at this motion, to be honest, Mr Mayor, it was unfortunately another attempt at playing things out in the media and trying to, well, I took it as a bullying attempt on me and my colleagues to take a particular line. You know, these sort of things, you know, could be addressed without having to go to a motion and talked about beforehand, and I think that would be a far better approach. But when it comes to, you know, we're getting into a very big slippery slope here. I mean, where does all this sort of stuff end? I mean, look, you know, far more people die from heart disease out there in the community, and what, are we going to start weighing everyone before meetings and checking in on selfies of us going for a run? I mean, you know, I know COVID's topical at the moment, but I mean, I just think that it's, I mean, as Alderman Kennedy just noted, Mr Mayor, there's plenty of other campaigns out there, and I think it's not up to us to be the so-called leaders of this thing. There's enough. It's a debate between an individual and their doctor, and I think that's where it should start and finish. I think if we're concerned about vaccination rates, I think there's some other barriers out there that need to be addressed in relation to state and federal government mismatches on policies in relation to numbers of vaccinations and what the lockdowns are going to happen. I mean, the confusion in that space is a far bigger issue in terms of vaccine uptake than anything we might do in this chamber. And I mean, to then suggest that it's up to us, you know, taking a photo and putting it out there, that's all of a sudden going to deal with it? No, well, it's not. I mean, that's the issue out there, is that the continual chopping and changing of what the goals are and what the targets need to be, and the effectiveness or non-effectiveness of lockdowns, and the misinformation that's out there is too big an issue for me. And I mean, unfortunately, like I said at the beginning, I mean, it's, you know, I mean, sometimes some of the things I certainly agree with. I respect those people who want to get a vaccine, and I encourage everyone to do that who wants to do it. But it's their personal choice. I don't think it's our role to get involved in this debate. And I think that, you know, expecting us to not be able to come into the chamber and all that sort of stuff, I mean, that was way over the top. But I mean, even on this one, I mean, it's you know, it's a personal choice. There's plenty of things out there in the media that encourage people to do it. I support high vaccination rates, but also support some clarity around what our path is out of this whole thing. And you know, and the real issue is we've got to come to terms with learning to live with it. And you know, pointing the fingers or trying to sort of, you know, paint someone as a bad person because they do or they don't say the wrong thing or the right thing or do it, take a particular act, that's a pretty big, you know, mandates and all those sort of things. I certainly would never support that sort of approach. But so no, I won't be supporting this motion. You know, for the reasons I've just gone through, and a few more, but I mean, I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Alderman Ewington. Other speakers? Alderman Pearce, then Alderman Edmonds.
Oh, thank you, Mayor. It's funny, Mayor, you know, I've always, like a lot of aldermen, encouraged business. And because certain people didn't have enough gumption to go and get the jab, so to speak, you know, a lot of businesses have had to close or reduce what efforts they can do. I don't think, if this motion said Clarence Council be encouraged to demonstrate, you know, support for business, we'd all say, oh yes, yes, we'd be doing it. But this indirectly, is asking us to demonstrate leadership by publicly declaring their COVID vaccination status and intentions. We talk about this every day at work. People said, have you been jabbed? I said, yeah, I've had both now. No worries at all. I'm still here. So, don't worry, go and get jabbed. And look, I'm a bit surprised that people are just picking up little things. Crikey, we're in a room together, we're all close together, and there's people in the public gallery. And I mean, I don't think it hurts to say that we're going to say to people, well, we've done it. We're not going to run a TV ad. All we're saying is, yes, we publicly support the COVID vaccination. So businesses and life can go on as best it can. It's going to come here at some stage. We know that, and we've just got to be prepared for it.
Thank you. Other speakers? Oh, sorry, Alderman Emmons. Yes.
No worries. Thank you. I think it's worth congratulating the people who have been behind the latest round of advertising on TV that's involved Tim Payne, Grace Tame, I think Booney was before that. It's all been level-headed, clear, very to the point. Do it. What does Grace Tame say? She says, do it for yourself, do it for your family, do it for your mates. I mean, essentially, that's what it's about for me, about keeping people that we care about safe. 100% support as many people as possible getting vaccinated against this pandemic-inducing virus. There's people out there who can't, under 12s. I mean, if we've seen the statistics from the mainland about primary schools, I think we've got to do everything we can to shield those who are most vulnerable. And it's quite, to digress a little bit, I mean, local government, certainly for the first round of COVID, is the most vulnerable cohort the first time around. It's the age of demographic, etc. And it's probably where we might have as high rates as any other cohort. I mean, I was lucky enough, due to specific reasons, to be able to get it as an under 40, and I'm really thankful for that. And I think the way that the clinics have been run by at the Royal was fantastic, and such a well-oiled machine. And that's what I think in Tasmania we've had is a really cool, calm and collected approach to this. It's been pretty methodical, really impressive stats compared to other states. Obviously, getting access to vaccines is a debate we could have about the federal government, etc., but I'm not going to enter that space right now. Other than to say, I'm proud, in fact, to pull out my little card that tells me, and I guess everyone else, that I had my first dose on 18 June 2021 and the second on the 9th of July. And I'm proud to do it, and I really hope that collectively, as a state, a country, and then as a planet, we can find our way to protect our most vulnerable people, and vaccination is obviously the fastest way to do it.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers? Alderman Blomley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Mr Mayor, I wasn't going to talk on any of the three notices of motion this evening, but I can't not on this one. For a very simple reason, Mr Mayor, and that is that I'm a strong believer in personal freedom. I'm a strong believer in personal responsibility as well. And Alderman Kennedy mentioned earlier tonight Grace Tame, and Tim Payne was also mentioned too, two of Clarence's favoured citizens. And they've been fantastic ambassadors for that very important message. And they've done a great job, as well as many other fine Australian men and women. But Mr Mayor, I have real problems when things start being dictated to us. And as Alderman Edmonds pointed out, the first iteration of this motion was not supportable in any way, shape or form, I think, by any fair-minded person, in my view.
Just to clarify, that it's not me, who's
Look...
Oh, sorry, Alderman Ewington, sorry. Yeah, thank you very much. No, thank you for that interruption. I appreciate the correction. So, as Alderman Ewington pointed out. So, Mr Mayor, I'm also a bit confused too. If you look at this significantly reduced motion before us this evening, because as we'll all recall, last meeting, in a personal explanation, the mover of this motion here stood up in this place and called you, the committee leader, questioning the rest of us as leaders of the community, Mr Mayor. that was done in this place 3 weeks ago. So I will not be supporting this motion, Mr Mayor, for a number of reasons. Number one being, it's not up to us as a council, say, dictating to any of its members or our citizens what they can and cannot do. That is not our role. Sure, we can incentivise, we can encourage, and then that certainly is to be supported. So to the last part of the motion there, Mr Mayor, publicly declaring their COVID vaccination status. Well, I can tell you, Mr Mayor, that 9 weeks ago I called the hotline, 9 weeks ago, and tomorrow morning, the 31st of August, is my first Pfizer jab. I'm looking forward to it because I'm doing my bit and that's my choice. Now, I don't know when I'll get my second one, but my intention, Mr Mayor, is to get the second jab as well. That's my personal choice. But it's not for me, or in my view, anyone else in this chamber, to start dictating to others what they can and cannot do. That is a very slippery slope. It is not something that our forefathers fought for, Mr Mayor. Personal freedom should remain sacrosanct at all times. I realise I'm raising my voice, I'm getting passionate, but referencing the earlier debate, Mr Mayor, I'm not being angry. I hope I'm not being offensive. I'm just putting a view very passionately. It ought to be the contest of ideas in this chamber, Mr Mayor, and this idea is not a good one.
Thank you, Alderman Blomley. Other speakers? Right to reply, Alderman Mulder.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. And for those people who spoke so passionately against the motion, I thank them for declaring their COVID status. And I think that that is an important thing. And just picking up on the last point, the idea that I was directing or that we were directing anyone to do anything just belies the use of the word encourage, which appeared in both motions, both the original one and this one. So in encouraging someone to do it, you're not directing anything. And can I also say that the argument about personal freedom and personal responsibility, of course, these are important issues and they are things, but we have a nationwide epidemic here, a nationwide emergency, and it's a health crisis, and there isn't a level of government or a community leader or an other organisation, the responsible ones that is, that aren't encouraging us to get on the bandwagon and deal with the vaccine hesitancy that's out there. All I am saying is that we either accept the fact that as elected members to the third tier of government, we have community leadership roles, which is different to council leadership roles, Mr Mayor. We have community leadership roles, and that in that leadership role, I think it's appropriate that we demonstrate our commitment to it. Now, if someone wants to say, no, I'm not going to declare it, that's fine. And no one's going to force them to. All we're saying is that the more people who declare that, the more stronger it sounds as if this council is prepared to step up to the plate. Personal freedom and personal responsibility. In New South Wales, as they are starting to ease lockdowns, and even though their crisis is continuing to mount, there is a requirement. You won't be allowed into the park with your family unless you demonstrate you have at least one shot of the vaccine. Now, for me, that is a personal freedom and a personal responsibility that we have to accept if we are to enjoy the other freedoms that are around the place. So with these things, in times of emergency, it's a quid pro quo. So it's not a question of me dictating anything or this council dictating anything. People are free to declare or not declare. They are free to vote for or against this motion. But the point is that this council and its members who do this are demonstrating some community leadership. And to say that it's not our role to provide community leadership is a strange thing for elected members of the third tier of government to be saying.
So the motion is as the amended motion which is on the board there. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried. Going back now to motion number 9.2, Alderman Edmonds. Do we have a seconder for that, please? Thank you, Alderman Walker. Alderman Edmonds.
Thank you, and with sincerest apologies for the manner in which the amendment was presented. As I tried to explain before, it was
presented as to be amended during the debate, or I thought it was much more fair-minded to present it before we even had a seconder. I think we all know why we're here with this motion. It was widely acknowledged 3 weeks ago during a debate about elected members' DA that there were people who felt uncomfortable or put in a difficult position. And being uncomfortable or being put in a difficult position is not something alien to us. Every 3 Monday nights we come in here, and despite the fact that we have a debate, essentially our vote's recorded in black and white. There's not a lot of context around a vote like that. So we do have to put ourselves through difficult, challenging, uncomfortable positions. I think the difference with this is that obviously people felt that there were is quite a close contact in terms of their management of a conflict of interest. You know, and according to feedback, well, and in fact it was noted on the night during the debate and even in discussions out in the workshop area that people didn't feel comfortable and in fact would support a move like this motion. You know, a review might turn out to find more cons than pros. I think that's entirely possible. But I think based on the feedback that we've got and in fact the way people talked about it at the time, and I know 3 weeks sort of smooths a lot of things out for us, but it was pretty widely acknowledged that it would be worth looking into doing something with this, and that's why I've jumped on this as a motion. It might come back and say that, no, you are still best placed as the decision makers in this and, you know, harden up, I don't know. Let's see. But after the events of the last meeting, I think we need to do something. And as I said, we've got the amended motion now, which has been circulated. I apologise for that being slightly late. However, I've explained why. And I hope that this is a pretty short debate, but I'm prepared to sum up. Thank you.
Thank you. Alderman Walker.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I also want to thank Alderman Evans for taking on board some of my suggestions. It could have been either done primary, which is what he's done tonight in moving it in the motion, or I could have thirded it on the spot, if you like. But I think this is probably a better way forward. And there are changes, and one of the things is that it's probably not going to be a binary thing of this is the best way and this isn't. I suspect an investigation is going to show that there might be 3 or 4 different ways, but there are going to be trade-offs. Now, there's some things that need to be borne in mind. People have rights to make an application for a development. That's eminently reasonable, and that should be handled fairly and appropriately. And again, there is a mechanism for community representation, again, which is of a comparable level to what would happen in other situations. And this may end up being one of the trade-offs if we just say, no, henceforth it will only be handled by planning officers or external planning officers. But the fact of the matter is that a motion that came before us at last week's meeting was outsourced for assessment, but remained, I guess, around the chamber for review. So all we want to do is be able to go through a best practice situation, have these things put to us so that, again, as situations might arise, we can explain why we go about this process, and I guess succinctly and eloquently, things that are pretty anonymous with my good self, we can explain to the community why we take these directions in assessing situations. So I appreciate that the suggestions were taken on board, and I think this is just best practice and good housekeeping, and I hope it will be supported.
Thank you. Other speakers? Alderman Jones.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and I thank Alderman Edmonds through the chair. Through the chair. I thank Alderman Edmonds for his clarification in relation to the motion, and I think he's really toned it down a bit, because on first readings it was sort of a little bit sort of out of left field, in my opinion. What is interesting about this particular motion is that, and I am speaking from my own personal experience, and that is that we are elected to this place and we have to determine issues on its merits. And we have to look outside the square as to and look at the merits of the particular DA and determine as to whether or not you are of the opinion, once you have been informed of the facts, as to whether or not you should vote one way or the other when the matter comes to council. Now, I have been in this place for a while, and over the years we've had a couple of instances where a couple of mayors have put up submissions for their subdivisions, and at that particular time I sought community advice. I went outside that particular area of responsibility and looked at the matters before the chair. And at that last meeting, I contacted the residents and informed myself as to whether or not those positions that they stood or what their reasonings for or against were, and I made a decision in relation to that. Now, I don't think this motion is really a way of getting around the question that the stipend that I'm paid per annum, $30,000, when I was first elected to council it was nothing, $30,000, you have to inform yourself, you have to talk to the officers, you've got to talk to the community, you've got to talk to those people who are being, in their opinion, adversely affected by any particular development. And I cannot see why the LGAT would be able to make any changes in relation to this when in fact, when you sign up to this particular position or when you take the stand and make that support or otherwise support and represent the community, then you have to represent the community. And I cannot accept the fact that if you're going to try to have a mechanism that it's going to remove any perception of conflict of interest, then I think that's an almost impossible task for any local government authority or lobbying the state government to be able to do. And I will state quite plainly that if you have some concern about a particular matter which may have impact upon one of your fellow colleagues, then you need to look outside the square. You need to investigate, you need to talk to those people who know about those things and look at and determine as to whether or not what they're saying in relation to that particular development application is right or wrong, or whether there's wriggle room for you to think otherwise. I will not be supporting this. I understand Alderman Edmonds' concerns, and I know how much angst a number of us went through at that last meeting, because it was a very difficult situation. But at the end of the day, we're here, we're elected to look at each and every issue on its merits, regardless of whether there is any pecuniary or other interest or conflict of interest that one of us elected representative has. I understand where Alderman Edmonds is coming from, but I think it's too loose, and I would, for 1 minute, not be able to support this because I believe it's abrogating our responsibilities as elected representatives.
Thank you, Alderman James. Other speakers? Alderman Blomley and then Alderman Pearce.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. And Mr Mayor, I thank the previous speakers for their contributions this evening. Alderman James is quite right, Mr Mayor, that there is a process and we're elected to do a job. There's no doubt about that, and we're elected to do the job to the letter of the law. The Act is quite clear with all planning matters, and we're reminded of that in a moment when we deal with this matter, then move into sitting as a planning authority. And at the moment, handballing it off somewhere else is, under the Act, an abrogation of our duty, in my view. And what's the next step? We move to regional planning authorities, and there's no input at all at this level. Faceless bureaucrats then decide what we'll be doing. But the process at the moment, as it stands, is that an application is made, it is advertised, it is then assessed by an independent, suitably qualified planner, as happened in the case that's been referred to, and then the decision is made here based on advice, and then of course the appeal process is able to run. That's how things sit, and frankly that sits pretty easily with me, because that's the job that we've got. We're a planning authority. That's part of our job. However, if you then look at the motion as amended, and I thank Alderman Walker for his contribution working with Alderman Edmonds on this issue, it's about lobbying the state government to investigate amending the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act. It's about investigation. And that's what LGAT's here for. It's to engage with the state government to see if there's a better way. And as Alderman Edmonds covered off in his opening remarks here today, look at investigating the pros and cons, the last stop point of the explanatory notes there. There may be too many cons to justify any change. We just don't know till we go through the process. Now, I'm not one that ordinarily supports investigations and reports for the sake of more paper, more trees being cut down. But on this instance, I am quite supportive. I am supportive because if this provides best practice, then surely that's something that we've all got to aim for at all times. So I thank the mover and the seconder for the motion as it now stands. And on that basis, Mr Mayor, I'm happy to support it.
Thank you. Alderman Pearce.
Mayor, look, I agree with Alderman James. I cannot support this. I think we've got a responsibility when we're elected. It's never said, oh, look, you're on a planning committee, but, you know, if another alderman puts something up, you know, it goes to this authority or that authority, I think that's totally wrong. Now, even though it may be a fellow alderman, I read the report, and in this case, you know, I supported the independent report on it and supported it. But look, if it said something else, I would have had no hesitation in not supporting it. I mean, really, I just cannot believe that we're saying to people, now they've got a chance to send their grievances to us, even though they may be solid grounds, or they may not be, but at least we can investigate them. As Alderman James quite rightly said, Mayor, that we can go out, we can discuss this with the people there. I'm scared if we lose the planning, some planning issues, that who have people got to put their complaints to or some concerns they have? So, Mayor, I think at the moment, you know, we've got to stand up. That's our responsibility at the moment, and I think that's the way it should stay.
Thank you. Alderman Urican.
Yeah, thank you. Look, I mean, seeing this is about something that I was intimately involved in last meeting, I mean, it's talk about, you know, I don't know why these things have to go out to the media again and become motions on notice on something so uncontroversial as what happened last meeting. I mean, I just don't get it. I mean, I'm talking to a few other people I know who've been in local government for a long period of time. You know, this sort of stuff's happened hundreds of times over the last 100 or whatever years of local government in Tasmania, and now all of a sudden everyone's conflicted about, you know, passing judgment on a DA. I mean, I just can't believe it, to be honest. You know, I don't know how the whole story ended up in the media as well. I mean, it's interesting to see that happen. Which anyway, you know, I mean, and just on that, I mean, I had to sit here and listen to colleagues suggest that I was a bad neighbour because I didn't, you know, talk to my neighbours enough. You know, you talk about bias and you know, conflict of interest. Well, how about being able to not be smeared because I had 9 representations against it? I mean, you know, there's two sides to this story too. You know, I mean, and that's certainly something that I wasn't comfortable with. I mean, the bottom line is, if you have a conflict and you feel that you can't pass judgment, well, you have the option to leave the room. You know, we live in a place where we know a lot of people, and I mean, all of us would have had DAs come up there where we know the people personally, and that will continue to happen. You know, at the end of the day, we've got to comply with the code of conduct, which we, you know, and there's ramifications if we don't follow certain procedures in that sort of situation. We have to follow what the planning scheme says. You know, that's got pretty, you know, legally binding components built into it, which, you know, we have to adhere to. You know, we can't just pluck a decision out of our backsides and make a decision. And then the other side of it is, I mean, if we, as a body, passed a DA which was blatantly biased, well, there's pretty serious legal and criminal, sanctions that would be straight onto us. So to suggest that we can't sit here and conflicted and stressing out about passing a simple DA because you were known to the person, I think that's just a total overreaction to the whole situation. And I mean, I notice in here, Alderman Edwards said that there's a number of ratepayers have written to council raising concerns. Well, I haven't seen any. It hasn't been raised with me before, and I'd be interested to know how that happened and it wasn't raised with us. I mean, is it just one person that's got it, or was it going to be shared with us? But, I can stand here and say that I base my decision based on the planning scheme alone, the information that's placed in front of me. Obviously, I'll be up front and admit that I would be more pro-development than some of my colleagues and be more likely to support things that might be on the borderline. But this is where this starts and finishes. If you're elected to the chamber, you know these things are going to come up. You base your decisions on the planning scheme. If you feel like you can't make a decision, you can leave the room and not do that. But to all of a sudden upturn the whole scheme when it's going to be the occasional thing here and there, Elgato got enough stuff on their plate already to deal with. Why do we have to keep adding more of this sort of stuff, onto them to go and deal with it? I mean, the over-regulation of things is just out of control. I mean, look, to be honest, it's not that hard, guys. Make a decision that's put in front of us based on what the planning scheme says. If you don't think you can do that, leave the room. If you think there's bias out there, well, there's plenty of mechanisms there to pull you into line if you think you're going to do that. And by doing this again, we're suggesting that we are going to be biased because we know someone. And it's only painting us more and saying, well, they're going to do another shonky deal somewhere in council. We can make decisions without it always being biased or having conflict of interest. Trust us to make the decisions. There's mechanisms there to stop anything untoward happening. And it's worked fine up to now. I don't see any reason to change it.
Thank you. Other speakers? Alderman Mulder.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Speaking of borderline, I think the process is not over until it's been through the appeal period. And to be reflecting on comments that your fellow alderman made whilst you were out of a room, right, for a matter that still isn't there, that to me is a concern because the matter isn't over. I was discharging my responsibilities, not abrogating them, and I made those sorts of comments, which are perfectly valid comments, I think, to make on any occasion, and I think a line may have been crossed here.
I will comment on that because these meetings are recorded, and the idea of leaving the room for a particular item is to ensure that you're not being seen to influence the debate. There is nothing to stop somebody from watching the debate afterwards on the replay.
My point was that then coming into the chamber and reflecting negatively on those comments, whilst the process is still underway.
I note your
the
point.
Conflict of interest, right, in that particular matter and the ones referred to in the motion are quite obvious. It's also noted that the Act makes no such distinction that amongst the colleagues, that those who choose to leave the room do so because they have, for their own reasons I'm sure. I, for one, remained in the room because, although the perception of conflict is a difficult one to avoid under the circumstances, I also think that that we are all to be mature enough to be able to put that to one side, as Alderman James said, and proceed to debate the matter as it should be debated. Also, we need to understand that we are applying the law, the planning law, as it is interpreted by us and as the people out there want to make their representations and to see whether or not we have any discretionary room in the particular planning application. Now, as applying the law and the thing to do, and I've I share the concerns that once we start coming up with some other method of adjusting the law for this or for that, then I think that it is a thin edge of the wedge. But to be honest with you, Mr Mayor, whilst ever we are in a situation where we must apply the law, we must apply policies that are established by another level of government, that we cannot represent the people outside those policies and that law that has been made by the state government, yet we are in the firing line because of issues like this or perceptions of bias, or because we haven't represented the people that we are there to do. It's a case of us standing in the road. It is us taking the heat from the community by making decisions that are predetermined by the state government and by their law and by their policies. To me, that is the position that becomes a little untenable when I'm supposed to be representing the people. And this may actually provide some wedge, some avenue where we can get to something which, as it applies in many other states, is that we have an expert panel of planning advisors who advise the Planning Commission about what the decision should be. So if you want to do anything, and this is particularly pertinent in a statewide planning scheme and statewide policies and laws, that you could go to an independent body on all matters, and the planning staff could make their recommendations to that body, and that body could then make its decisions. The Planning Commission, which is empowered to oversight the Planning Act, the legislation. And then, if you had a problem, if the people wanted to appeal against it on some sort of grounds, you would then appeal to a judicial authority who could do more than apply the process, but could actually set up a precedent of law like they do with every other piece of legislation in the country, and that would then become a proper judicial review. And all this stuff about councillors and us taking the heat for other people's decisions would be avoided. So I will support the motion. And I just alert you to, an opportunity to provide my contributions as to the vexed situation you have when you have we acting as a planning authority, applying the laws and policies of other levels of government and taking the community heat for it.
On a point of clarification, if I may, Mr Mayor.
Sorry?
On a point of clarification.
Is it a personal explanation?
No, it's a point of clarification.
I'm sorry, I can't. There's no provision for that. I can only.
Well, I didn't interrupt Alderman Mulder, and he said
Alderman
at the end of his comments was misleading, Mr Mayor.
Alderman Blomley, that's for others to pick up in the debate. I can't enable you under meeting regulations to contest points that have been made in the debate once you've already spoken.
Could I personally express them in a personal explanation, Mr Mayor?
I'm sorry.
All right.
No provision. Alderman Warren.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd like to thank my colleagues for their contributions this evening, particularly to Alderman Edmonds and Alderman Walker for the motion in front of us. I think I'm in the position where I agree with something that everybody has said, or at least one thing that everybody has said tonight. So, yes, we are here to do a job. We have a very clear planning scheme to follow. I believe that our role is important because there is local context, there is discretion. Otherwise, there's no point us being here. So I think that it is important that we do get to make decisions for our community. However, I draw your attention to the wording of the motion, which is particularly the last bit, as a means of removing any perception of bias or conflict of interest. Perception is a really important thing. I believe Alderman Newington said there are two sides to every story. There certainly are. We were well informed of the one side of the debate, the people who put forward representations. In this instance, I didn't feel comfortable seeking the other side of the debate. And normally I would seek the people who are unhappy with the proposal. I would also seek information from people who are putting forward the proposal to get that balance. So this was an unusual situation in that. I won't go to any reasons as to that, but it just put me in an uncomfortable position. I think the conflict of interest, this is Tasmania, it's Clarence in Tasmania. We all know each other, we all spend time together, we all go to each other's weddings even, and if you were to take out anybody who had a perceived conflict of interest, there may not be enough of us left to vote on the issue. So I think, again, there's no harm in seeing if there is a better way. There's no harm in investigating whether in fact we are pursuing best practice here. And I think there are, again, a number of steps in a motion like this. Anytime we ask somebody else to lobby the state government on our behalf, and we've seen a few motions like that in this place, then they often don't go anywhere, and we get a response back 3 months later saying thanks but no thanks. But I think there's no harm in seeing if there is a better way to do it that would allow us to do our job without any perception of bias or conflict of interest.
Thank you. Other speakers? Alderman von Berto and then Alderman Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Mr Mayor, I'm going to start by referring to what Alderman James actually said. And I'm going to note that I actually was the alderman who followed up with the General Manager in relation to the recent Alderman's development application because in situations like this I often follow up with the General Manager for advice in relation to how I should actually stand on a matter. And in relation to getting that advice, the General Manager decided to get some independent legal advice, which was provided to all of us. And I'd just like to quote from that legal advice, only one paragraph. It actually says it would be reasonably expected that the Planning Authority, dealing as it does with many merits-based applications for development approval, would be capable of determining a development application from a fellow alderman in an important way having regard to the merits, in an impartial way, having regard to the merits of the proposal in front of them and an assessment of that merit against the provisions of the planning scheme. So very much what Alderman James actually said. Just let's keep that in mind for a moment, because as you would all be aware, every council meeting at item 5 on the agenda, it deals with declarations of interest of aldermen. And it says, in accordance with Regulation 8 of the Local Government Meeting Procedures Regulations 2015 and Council's adopted Code of Conduct, the Mayor requests aldermen to indicate whether they have a pecuniary interest or other type of conflict of interest in any item on the agenda. And you often see that an alderman goes out of the room in relation to a matter, as the Deputy Mayor has in relation to this one. It's my understanding, and over 15 years of being on the Planning Authority, it is my very clear understanding that although advice can be sought from the Mayor or the General Manager or a third party, it's ultimately the decision for an individual alderman to make as to whether or not they have a pecuniary or conflict of interest, and therefore that they determine that they will leave the room, they will stand aside from the decision. So that's an important fact that we need to keep in mind. If it was the case that we actually lacked a quorum because a number of aldermen determined that they did have a conflict of interest in relation to a fellow alderman having a development application before council, then my understanding is that the decision would be made by delegation by the Manager of City Planning. And in this case, if that occurred, then there would be an opportunity for the alderman concerned to appeal to RIMPAT if that alderman so desired. So we have a number of statutory mechanisms and processes in place already that actually deal with this situation. I therefore do not understand why we need to investigate this particular issue of concern to Alderman Edmonds. So I will not be supporting this motion.
Thank you, Alderman Lamberto. Alderman Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I really wasn't going to say anything too much about this at all, but having heard the conversation around the table, it makes it quite evident to me why this motion is so important. A couple of times I've asked whether we've been in similar situations, previous councils, me only being a newbie, and there haven't been too many similar. I actually have also spoken to a number of people that have a lot of experience in council matters and people that I respect, and even before the changes were made, and I do like the word investigate, their comments were, this is an excellent motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Right to reply, Alderman Edmonds.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr Mayor. Appreciate the comments made around the table on this topic. I think, as I foreshadowed when I moved it, that it's a bit of a grey area in terms of how people feel about this. I really do appreciate the comments made by a number of people about the fact that we are elected to make decisions on their merits, you know, doing what we're paid to do. Comment about that there's measures already in place. Of course there's measures already in place. Obviously these things have to be dealt with. Really, it just comes back to the crux of it being that it's an investigation. If we feel like the way things went was best practice, then great, don't support the motion. But you know, I think we do have. I think Alderman Blondley put it pretty well when summing up the sort of cons and the pros. I really don't see what this isn't tossing confetti into the wind. This is a serious issue that needs a serious look at it. And yeah, it might come back and say, actually, we've looked at this, and I think Alderman Warren talked about the fact that you know, the loss of local voices. Well, perhaps that's the biggest determining factor in the way that the investigation might come back. But the concerns have been raised about, is that the best that we could do? And I think, you know, we had the conversation within days of that meeting saying how's a better way we could do it. And the advice was that we should be done through a notice of motion. And just to pick up on the comment about media, our agendas are a public document. People are interested in the decisions that we make. To constantly cast aspersions about why the things that we do are picked up in the media is really, really disappointing.
Thank you. So the motion before the chair is that LGAT lobby the state government to investigate as opposed to consider, with several other changes as circulated. All those in favour? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 against. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Make that 5. Oh, I've missed someone. All those in favour? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Sorry. So the motion is carried.
You missed yourself, I think, Mr Mayor.
Okay. Could we recall Alderman Chong, please? Moving to item 11.2, petitions. We have a response there to the draft dog management policy that Council notes intentions to consider the review as part of the dog management policy review. Move in a second, please. Thanks, Alderman James. Second, take Alderman Kennedy. Do you wish to speak to it?
As it is. Thanks.
Thank you, Alderman Kennedy. Any other speakers? Put the motion. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you. I advise now we intend to sit as a planning authority under the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act. And the first item there is 11.3.1, the development application at 4 Ballawinnie Road for additions and alterations to a dwelling and carport. Moved Alderman Ewington, thank you. Second Alderman Bromley. Alderman Ewington.
No thanks, Mr Mayor, as per officer's recommendation.
Thank you, Alderman Bromley. Any other speakers? Put the motion. All those in favour? The motion is carried unanimously. 11.3.2 is a development application for 24 Lagoon Road, Otago Bay for an outbuilding, retrospectively. Thanks, Alderman Walker. Second Alderman Ewington. Alderman Walker.
But this
Alderman
time.
Ewington.
No, other than say, it seems like a pretty complex situation that the proponents have worked hard to try and resolve and comply with council recommendations. And I trust the staff to have sorted this one out, hopefully, and everyone can move on. And yeah, it's all pretty well addressed in the report, so I encourage everyone to support this one.
Thank you. Other speakers? Any need for a right of reply there, Alderman Walker? Put the motion for approval, subject to conditions and advice. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. 11.3.3, a development application at 2 and 4 Dunbar Street, Para, for demolition of dwelling and 6 multiple dwellings. Alderman James. I should have remembered. There have been a number of occasions tonight, Alderman James.
Words, Mr Mayor. And I formally move the alternative motion as circulated this evening.
Do I have a seconder, please? Alderman Pearce, thank you. Alderman James, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you, Alderman Pearce. Look, the matter of the development application at 2 and 4 Dundallah Street, Howrah. It's an interesting one because, I just want to put it in 2 parts. Firstly, the application is refused for the following reasons. The proposal does not comply with clause 10.4.2p3 as it will cause unreasonable loss of amenity and cause overshadowing impact to the adjoining properties. In particular, Mr Mayor, those properties that are adjacent to Tranmere Road and they're on the western boundary of the development will cause overshadowing to the degree that 3 of those dwellings are 2-storey, and notwithstanding they are at the height, as mentioned in the officer's report, of 7.8. The number of properties that are actually on that western boundary have their properties much lower than what is the natural ground level in relation to the development of those 3 2-storey dwellings as per the applicant. It's going to cause loss of amenity to those properties and it will also have overshadowing impact to those properties in question. Also, the proposal does not comply with clause 10.4.2p3 in respect of the visual impact in terms of bulk and proportion when viewed from the adjacent lots. Again, those properties, 64, 66, 68 Tranmere Road, are very much in that lower side of the development on the western boundary, and the impact of the bulk and scale of those and being well and truly above the actual height of the properties that are on the lower side of that western boundary is going to impose a visual impact of the bulk and scale and size that is going to be viewed by them. Also, the proposal does not comply with clause 11 E15.7.4 P1 in respect of the site is identified as having a flood risk to users of the site or adjoining or nearby land. There is already some mention by the officers in the report about the flood risk, and also on page 85 of the officer's recommendation there has been advice, and I quote, "Units 1 and 2 are located within a mapped flood-prone area, and as such attention should be taken to ensure that the works comply with the requirements of the building regulations, 2.214 section, etc., and the Building Act." So it's been identified that there is a problem in relation to the fall of the land and the sort of what is currently being referred to as natural ground seepage, but by the concentration it would have seemed that it's been identified as being in a map-prone area of some degree of risk to the properties, particularly in relation to those on the western boundary. I seek council support.
Thank you. Alderman Pearce.
Thank you, Mayor. Alderman James has alluded to one of my concerns, the floodplain area, and I know one of the objectors also raised it. And, you know, we've had trouble with things like this before, and you've got to be damn careful. When I read the report, except for that part, I thought, oh, yes, you know, fairly straightforward. When I went and had a look, geez, I got quite a shock, and I could see how, especially I think number 16, Alinta, how that would, you know, really have everything taken away, its view and whatever. And, you know, we get to number 66 and 68 Tranmere Road. The overlooking of that is just horrendous. But my concern is, and I'm not really convinced that the floodplain area that Alderman James raised is really satisfactory dealt with, because we've had this trouble before in Howrah where, you know, streams came down and many years, they were that old that no one knew about them, and we wonder why things kept flooding and why water kept appearing. And this could be another one of those areas that I could see we could have trouble with. So, Mayor, as I said at first, I was going to support it. And as we've talked earlier, once I start to look into it, I thought, geez, there's more to this than meets the eye, so I support the refusal, Mayor.
Thank you. Other speakers? Alderman Ewington.
Well, I'll be proposing to move the officer's recommendation to approve this one if this motion is unsuccessful, Mr Mayor. You know, I mean, where do I start? Basically, I mean, the stormwater stuff. I mean, all of these issues that are raised here are dealt in the officer's report. You know, I mean, I note in there that the, you know, I mean, this business about two-storey houses, and it's going to can't have two-storey houses. I mean, look, it's part of the scheme. The scheme says people are allowed to build two-storey houses. The scheme says they're allowed to have a lot size, what was it, 325 square metres. They meet that, you know. I mean, the stormwater's dealt with. You know, there's engineering plans in there to show that this is going to be better than what it is at the moment. You know, and then a lot of the other representations which really don't apply here. But you know, people can't. You know, we had the meeting last week about the city. What's it called? Metro plan. You know, and looking at how we're going to deal with, you know, long-term planning for, you know, better public transport. You know, getting more high-density housing in and around, you know, transport corridors. Well, I mean, this one's pretty close to a transport corridor up and down Tranmere Road. You know, people want to live in their own house, in their own communities as they get older. I mean, it deals with that. You know, I mean, we can't continue to legitimise these sort of objections that, you know, as the report says, either are irrelevant or the design comes up with an acceptable solution as part of the planning scheme. You know, we can't be both. You know, we've got to be able to sort of sit here and look at what the officers say. They've dealt with all of the objections that were put forward. Some of them, we all know, were vexatious and irrelevant and didn't come into it. I know we're not talking, I mean, Alderman James's motion doesn't address all of those, but the ones that he's picked out, you know, I mean, in the stormwater, I mean, Council's engineer is satisfied that the proposed on-site stormwater drainage system will achieve satisfactory stormwater quality outcomes. The issue in relation to inundation prone, you know, Council's engineer is satisfied that there will be no risk to users of the site or adjoining or nearby land as a result of the proposal, in that there would be 300 mil clearance from the finished surface level to the low-level floor level of the affected units. You know, it just goes on and on and on. I mean, we can't have this. People have to, you know, deal with this rule book, have this as the rule book, go out and comply with it, and then turn around and say, no, we're not going to approve it. I mean, I just don't understand it. I mean, look, to be honest, Mr Mayor, I mean, every single time we've gone down this path, where we've gone against officers' recommendations for something like this and knocked it back, it's been ultimately been approved by the Planning Commission. You know, I mean, this is costing ratepayers a lot of money. It's causing angst to developers. It's creating a situation where we're not allowed to move ahead in relation to the metro plans and the long-term planning that's been put in place for our city to deal with all of the homelessness issues, housing affordability, infrastructure planning, and all the things that are the bigger picture issues. And we turn around and something like this comes up and we want to turn around and knock it back. You know what I mean? Things change. I mean, I remember one of the representatives that sent me an email said, "Oh, look, you know, I built a nice, viewing deck and closed it all in and whatever, and now this is going to build up, so I won't be able to see my have a nice view of the city." Well, I mean, they didn't mind doing their development and building onto their place, and now they want to stop the next person doing something to improve their, to develop another or develop the site according to the scheme, doing something they're allowed to do. I mean, I just don't understand it. But look, once again, we just can't continue to knock back developments like this that comply with the scheme, and I'd encourage my colleagues to vote down this alternative motion and do what is the right thing here, which is to approve this development. It's changed. Some people don't like it. I get that. But it complies with the scheme. It's been recommended for approval, and I think that's the only thing that we've got left open to us here.
Thank you. Other speakers? Alderman Walker and then Alderman Mulder.
Yes. Just looking at this, I note that there was multiple representatives, and we have a statutory planning process, and the right to make a representation is a fundamental part of it, and I respect everybody's right to do that. Yeah. I received representations. I looked over them studiously. I have visited the site, and here we are with a alternate motion. Now, the officer's recommendations are that it be approved, and I know Alderman Newington has foreshadowed that. A couple of points while they're in my head. There was talk, a concern particularly around number 16 Alinta. Well, number 16 Alinta is actually going to become Unit 5, and number 16 Alinta is at the highest point of the hill as far as any of these units are concerned. So I'm a bit perplexed around that one. 325 metres is the as of right density. This is around 329, so more, smaller than some developments perhaps, but it meets the 325, and I think people know concerns that I raise when applications don't. So I guess for me the fundamentals fall in and around the stormwater now, or inundation if you like. I think they're legitimate concerns for people to raise. Now, the council engineers have looked over this. They're satisfied with it, and perhaps a pertinent question that I might ask through them, or through you rather, Your Worship, is if the mechanisms embedded as part of this development application, any development application were to not meet necessary requirements, what would be the process going forward?
Let me address it this way, if I can. The application would be subject to conditions. Those conditions must be met as part of the approval process. It would include in this case certain engineering conditions. Those things must be addressed in terms of approved plans before the development is given building approval, and those things are checked as part of the final completion process, and the kind of belt and braces, which is really important in this, is most of our units are strata titled, and we have a system in place whereby strata title will not be sealed until all conditions are verified as being met and the development has been completed in accordance with the permit.
I appreciate the illumination on that matter, and I think the crux of it was around the issue of stormwater, and there's the head of power to address it. So, bearing in mind those aspects, I still think from the site visitation, from the report as it's written, from the response to the question, that the appropriate thing is to support the officer's recommendation.
Thank you. Can I just clarify one thing there? I think you said, was it 15 a litre?
Sorry.
Did say 15.
15 is not actually part. I just need to clarify.
Yeah, no. The seconder, I think, mentioned number 16.
Yeah, I did.
And I'm just pointing out that is Unit 5, Your Worship.
I'm sorry.
Look, I'm sorry, but it's not possible for you to enter the debate. Mr. Lovell, could you just clarify that?
Sorry, I retract that. I can see my...
Yeah.
I see that. I see where... Yep,
Okay, I think from a planning point of view, we really need to be aware of the facts, so I just make sure that that's
was an error on my
understood.
part. Sorry, I think in Unit 5.
So points of clarification are available.
Thank you. Thanks, Alderman Walker. Alderman Mulder.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I've been to the site, I've seen it, I've been in communications with representatives, I've read the planning officer's report, and once again I can join in is, if you're living somewhere and something's happening next to you, you have every right to make your point clear. And I have a lot of sympathy, because in this area, when people moved into these areas, they were single dwellings on largely sized blocks of land, and that was, quote, what in layman's terms is the amenity of the area. Unfortunately, we have a planning scheme that defines amenity somewhat differently. So then you've got to go and say, well, you listen to all these objections, and as much sympathy as you have with them, the point is that you must take those objections, apply them to the planning scheme, the statewide planning policy as it is, and there's only flexibility around the edges. And the edges are the performance criteria, which is where the acceptable solutions aren't met, you then have to go in there. And if you have a look at them, and I'll just take the alternative motion one by one, that it will cause unreasonable amenity and cause overshadowing impact to the adjoining properties. The word is unreasonable loss of amenity, and I don't think, if you look at the report and you see there, as disappointing as it might be, that it quite makes the unreasonable loss of amenity test. Not any loss of amenity, it's got to be unreasonable, and that makes it really difficult to agree with that proposal. The proposal does not comply with 10.4.23 in respect to the visual impact in terms of bulk and proportion when viewed from adjacent lots. Once again, we've got the bulk and scale. Now, we've had this argument before, and we've successfully moved a motion against it, and I refer to the 85 or 83 East Derwent Highway. In that case, the unreasonable bulk and scale was a two-storey building across the entire length of the property of a neighbouring boundary, whose house view was completely overblocked and all the rest of it. When we took that to the planning tribunal, no, there wasn't massive cost to everyone involved, but what they did do is there was a mediated solution. Now, the mediated solution did not exactly satisfy the objectors. So once again, when we look at this scale, we've got to have a look at some of the precedents and the way things have gone. And as much as I might have sympathy with the neighbours, it doesn't quite make that one as bulk and scale in my mind. Then you've got the issue of the stormwater, and I think we can go on with that. And I may note that, unless I've missed it, that wasn't raised by any of the representatives, but was picked up by the council staff, who, as Alderman Walker has managed to clear out, have found out that there's an engineering solution, as there usually is to stormwater problems, and that the house must be built. So, as much as I have sympathy with them, with the objectors on this particular one, particularly the neighbours, I'm also in a position where I must apply the planning scheme and I must obey it, and that's a requirement of the legislation. So, as I said, as much as I have sympathy and all the rest of it, and in my house I live in a street which is surrounded by about 56 multiple dwellings, two-storey apartment blocks, but that is the nature of the way things have gone. So I find myself here now having to talk to people and say I have to apply the scheme as it stands by the law, And of the 3 points where I'm sought to reject this, I think they will stand next to zero chance of even a mediated solution in the planning appeals. And having made that judgment, here I stand, Mr Mayor, I can do no other.
Thank you. Alderman Warren.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm just going to draw on my knowledge of the Building Act and flood mapping and perhaps seek some clarification from Mr Lovell through you. The advice from the planning officers is that because it's in a flood mapping zone, that all works must comply with the Building Act. And from memory, that means that they have to be built at a certain height above ground, which is higher in a flood mapping zone than for ordinary ones. So and I just had a quick look at the plans again, and it doesn't look like those units that are in the flood mapping zone are any different to the others. It looks like they're basically ground level. They're not built up in any way. So in order to, and I know that the building application is not part of this, but in order to meet those conditions, if that required the dwellings to be higher, would that then come back to us because it didn't comply with the planning scheme?
Mr.
Through
Lovell,
you.
are you able to comment on it?
Through you, Mr Mayor, any alteration to an approved planning permit plan when it comes to building may well result in either an application for a minor amendment to an application, and I stress minor, or it may result in a new application. And there have been times when as a result of actually flood levels, that building permits have shown that the floor height had to be increased with consequent impacts, and that then brought the application back as a new application once or twice.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Alderman Edmonds.
Thank you very much. Like a few others, there's been a bit of reading in terms of the report and the recommendations that we've got here today. I'll echo what a couple of others have said, that people are more than within their rights to make representation when there's a development application, well, anywhere in the city really, and their motives for doing that I would never question. Taking those concerns on board, and yes, being in the street, unfortunately not to have a chat, I think on balance, and I won't go over the messages that have been given by others, but I think on balance the conditions and as we've heard, the enforcement of them is stringent enough. And I have to echo the thoughts of that I don't think that this would have a chance at an appeal, and I, in good faith, can't support it because I don't want to create that expectation. That's just my view.
Thank you. If there are no other comments, right a reply, Alderman James.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and may I say that in determining any application, that the planning authority has to obviously apply the applicable standards and requirements, as well as any representations received to the conformity with the case and exercise discretion. This is a particular matter where the applicant is seeking a discretion from the planning scheme. If it was a permitted use, it wouldn't come to this council. It would be handled under the authority and direction of the planning department. But the very nature of this means it has to come to council, and council can exercise its discretion in relation to this. On page 88, it's quite clear that there are concerns in relation to the setbacks and the building envelope for all dwellings, and in particular units 1, 2 and 3, which border on the western boundary of the development. On page 89, the officers go into great detail in referring to 66, 68 Tranmere Road, and also during the other sections of it, it refers to the overshadowing at parts of the ground level, etc. And also it refers to, amongst other things, the question about Unit 1 and also to the fact that the Unit 1 would have an east-facing private open space area measuring that by that, which does not comply, and then under the prescribed solutions, under what is applying to the acceptable solutions of 4 metres by 4. Unit 2 to 6 inclusive do comply, but Units 1 and 3 do not. And therefore they go and look at the other performance criteria. There are certain problems with this particular development, and the very nature of where Units 1, 2 and 3 are located are going to cause unreasonable loss of privacy, and the bulk and scale and size of those particular developments will in fact cause also a lot of undue impact on them. There were 11 applications, and if you read the comments, none of them, well, a couple in fact, probably referred to land values and loss of views, but the majority of the representatives refer to the bulk and scale, the loss of their amenity, and the fact that there is this imposing large development that's on their western boundary. And if you look on the actual attachments, you can see what the scale and size of those Units 1, 2 and 3. There's a very narrow corridor between them, very little corridor, so really you have one massive building on that western boundary, and if you can talk about us making decisions...
Thank you, Alderman James. So the motion before the Chair is for refusal. All those in favour? Against? The motion is lost. Alderman Newington for foreshadow. Do I have a seconder? Second, Alderman Blomley. Do you wish to speak further?
Oh, look, only briefly, Mr Mayor. I mean, look, you know, at no time did I suggest that people don't have a right to make to put a representation forward. My only concern was that we must continue to push well, not push, but I mean, make it clear to people out there that any representations need to address the planning scheme. And I know it makes it difficult for some people to see change in our communities, but it's important that we keep it based around those issues. But the other thing is too, the number of representations is not relevant. You know, just because a lot of people don't like a particular development doesn't mean that it has more merit. Once again, it's got to come back to what the planning scheme says. And if you read through this report here, it's quite clear the developer has spent a lot of time complying with the scheme, which is all they have to do. You know, it's not a popularity contest, because if it was done that way, we'd never get a lot of things done in our city. And I encourage my colleagues, and it seems like most of them agree with this, that it's going to comply with the scheme, and that this is a good decision by us to approve it.
Thank you, Alderman Blomley.
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
Any other speakers? Alderman Mulder.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just picking up on one other point, and when we talk about all these multiple units and things on a site, the fact is that the planning scheme requires an objective area size, you know, under the stratal title arrangements of 325 square metres, and it's only around below that there's wiggle room. And in this particular case, that minimum is exceeded for each and every lot. So therefore, it's very difficult to mount the arguments about building envelopes and overshadowing from that part of the scheme. And once again, my sympathy lies with the neighbours, but the fact is that the amenity of an area has been changed, and that what we mean by amenity is not what the planning scheme means by amenity, and it ticks the boxes. So we are here. We do not have much option here.
Yeah. Alderman James.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, there is an option here, and okay, the last motion, the motion that we consider was lost, but it's incorrect to say that the number of representatives basically has no determining weight, in as much as that in determining any application, then their applications have to be considered as part of the process. And also, the fact of the matter is that if it was a permitted use, then we wouldn't have anything to do with it. And also, you can actually say that the performance criteria are in many cases subjective, because of the very nature of how the planners would apply to certain circumstances. And rather than go into any detail, the fact of the matter is that you need to look at each and every case where there's an exception to the following. And in this particular case, there's exceptions to the general residential zone and so on and so forth. It talks about overshadowing, and it also says that at least 3 hours of sunlight has to be as part of the winter solars. There is some subjectivity in relation to that, because where and what time and what basically the outdoor living part is being associated with. So it's, in my opinion, you just cannot, in isolation, just take on board the matter of the planning department. You have to consider all aspects of it, and a lot of these people, residents who've actually submitted their representations, talked about fact. They were objective, and it wasn't any subjective nature in relation to their comments, because they were really concerned about their living, their premises, how they're going to be impacted upon. Anyway, so if it goes and gets to the stage where it's not meets the building application or the building code, then, okay, there may be some chance for this to come back to council for reconsideration, because they're unable to build those units if they're on flat ground or on ground, which is on a basic level as the other units. I will not be supporting this motion, because I believe the 11 residents had every right and put forward legitimate reasons for why this particular development should not be approved.
Thank you. Other speakers? Right, a reply. Alderman New? No. So the motion before the Chair is the officer's recommendation for approval, subject to conditions and advice. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried. And that concludes our business tonight as a planning authority. Next item on the agenda is 11.5.1, where it's recommended we approve a draft tree policy for the purposes of public consultation. Alderman Blomley, thank you. Second to Alderman Kennedy. Alderman Blomley? No. Alderman Kennedy? No. Other speakers? Put the motion. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. 11.5.2 is a stormwater management procedure. It's simply to note, for Council to note, that a new procedure will apply with the start of the new planning scheme. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please? Thanks, Alderman Chong. Seconder? Alderman Kennedy, thank you. Any debate? Alderman Mulder, you have it. I thought it was Alderman.
Just as perhaps a question about it will come in force with the advent of the new planning scheme.
Correct.
Does that mean, Mr Mayor, that any current applications that are before council will have to conform with the old standards?
I believe so, but I'll ask Mr.
So is there any retrospectivity in relation to the application of the new standards?
Mr Mayor, no, I'm happy to say that all applications that are valid on the day before the new scheme comes into force will be dealt with under the current arrangements. However, anything that comes in afterwards or is made valid will be dealt with under the new system and of planning controls, including this new policy.
So, Mr Mayor, I take it from that, and a simple yes would be suffice, that that the conditions that are applied to DAs, development applications, will be based on the planning scheme or on the policy, stormwater policy, at the date of the application for that.
At the date that they become valid.
Yeah.
Mr Mayor, you're correct. It's the date the application becomes valid after the new scheme comes in.
Thank you. Any other debate? Any other points? In that case, right, a reply. Put the motion. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Moving on to governance, 11.7.1, that the quarterly report to the 30th of June 21 be received. Thank you, Alderman Chong. Second to Alderman Newington. Debate? Anyone wish to speak to this? Alderman Blomley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just a couple of points, and First, I congratulate the GMX team for putting this together. It's a very comprehensive report. I refer to page 54 under corporate support. In particular, we're told that during this last quarter of financial year that there were 15 resignations and 8 permanent employees recruited. I know, as a number of colleagues have attended the retirement events for long-standing staff members, my question is, through you, Mr Mayor, to General Manager, is that seen as normal practice, that we would see sort of 15 resignations in a 3-month period?
General Manager.
Thank you for the question. Through you, Mayor, off the top of my head, that number is probably a little bit higher than normal, but at this point in time, I think I'd put it down to a post-COVID sort of peak, if you like, in terms of we saw a decrease during the last 12 months in terms of resignations and staff turnover. We're seeing it come up a little bit at the moment. So I don't think it's something to be particularly concerned about, but certainly is something that we're watching.
Thank you, through you, Mr Mayor, General Manager, for that. So my next question is related. We've recruited 8, so that is just over half of the 15 that we've lost. Is the view that we need to recruit those additional 7, if my maths is correct?
That would be my understanding, and there's, at any one time there are always a number of recruitments in play, and certainly we have been actively recruiting over the last couple of months.
Right, thank you. And so, Mr Mayor, my next question is, we're told further on page 54 that there's currently 3 open workers' comp claims, with 11 new claims arising during the quarter. Is that considered normal in the scheme of normal business operations?
I'd probably need to take that on notice and take some advice from the HR manager, Alderman Blom.
Thank you. And my last question, Mr Mayor, refers to capital works for the June quarter on page 83, and in particular school road construction. The question is probably through you, Mr Mayor, to Mr Graham. The remaining works have been deferred pending resolution of headworks issues with developers. Have those headworks issues been resolved? Are they close to being resolved?
Mr Graham.
Through Mr Mayor, that's maybe the wording's not probably quite right there, because if it's related to our capital works, I would have to check on that. There's a council decision to put the upgrading of School Road on hold until until further development because of the headworks. But we did agree at the last budget that this matter would come back to council in terms I will update on a cost-benefit analysis for council to consider in the next budget period.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. If there's no further comments, I'll put the motion that the quarterly report be received. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. 11.7.2 is a housing land supply order. We've been invited by the state government to comment, and council is advising the state government in regard to that land. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please? Thanks, Alderman Ewington. Second, Alderman Chong. Alderman Ewington.
I think, after reading through the report, it seems like we certainly support any opportunities to get further infill housing in areas that will help the supply of affordable housing, but it's also important that we advise of concerns we might have about the engineering aspect of that. Hopefully that's something that can be worked out, but I think this is just a please note, and hopefully they'll work their way through it, and we'll see this come online in the short term or medium term.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'll echo Alderman Ewington's comments. I think that we do strongly support putting affordable housing in our municipality, but it would be really remiss of us not to mention that this site has a lot of constraints around it and may not be suitable.
Okay. Alderman Mulder.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I also support the motion, but I just have some concerns about the fact that when you look at the proposed accommodation layout, it occupies the full area and the full zone, and it then comes back to The landslip, I think, was potentially subject to landslip areas and things like that. And I think we might be right to advise the state government that their proposal might look good from a sparrow flying overhead, but it's likely to meet some requirements should they choose to do those things. So I think it's appropriate to advise them, but I'm just seeking to see if, and perhaps it's another question for the engineering department, is when you get something like an area subject to landslip, is it possible to come up with engineering solutions that would resolve that landslip issue? And I'm hoping they'll be different to the ones they came up with out of Glenorchy. Sorry, Mr Mayor, that was a question to the...
Oh, I'm sorry, I thought that was a rhetorical question. I misread it.
Well, through Mr Mayor, you'll have to go through stormwater geotechnical analysis. That's why we're noting in the report that there's significant engineering issues to be looked at in terms of this land.
Yep. Okay. Being no other speakers, Alderman Ewington, right to reply. Put the motion then that we go ahead and advise the government. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Moving on to the 11.7.3 is the Community Volunteer Sustainability Study. That we endorse that study and recommend that we reconvene the network. Thank you, Alderman Warren. Second that. Take Alderman Kennedy there. Alderman Mulder, I'll take.
Which particular motion am I seconding?
11.7.3. Alderman Warren, would you like to speak to the motion? Alderman Mulder?
Yes, Mr Mayor. The volunteers sustaining that. In fact, there's nothing more important to the functioning of our society than our volunteer networks, and I'm sure many of us in many capacities have also been involved in volunteers, and here is one where perhaps there's not one of us that couldn't have a conflict of interest when we're discussing this particular matter, because we all know them, and I just want to reinforce the very, very important role that volunteers do, not only in well-being but also in landscape management and services to those with difficulty, and I know that there are many people who put many hours and spend a lot of their own time and money as well, without seeking the reimbursements to which they may be entitled because of their sense of obligation to their communities. And that sort of spirit really does need to be encouraged. But I note as a conflict of interest that my son features on the front cover, so but I commend him for that, and it's certainly indicative of what so many people in the community do.
Thank you. Other speakers? Alderman Ewington?
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. I mean, look, obviously, none of us are going to, or all of us are going to agree that volunteers play an integral part in our community, and that we could certainly do with a few more. Look, to be honest, I'll be up front and say that I don't support this approach at the moment. I mean, a couple of different reasons for that. One, because it was put in front of us at very short notice without any real chance to review it and consider it before it went out and before being asked to vote on it. I'll give you an example of that. I mean, I'm working through the Sport and Recreation Action Plan, or the Strategic Plan at the moment. I wouldn't suggest that would be put in front of Aldermen 3 weeks and then asked to be voted on 3 weeks later. And I think it's not the way to go. I know we've got a lot of work on our plate. I'm not having a go at anyone about this, but I just think that sometimes some of these things we need a little bit more time and a chance to review them before we are expected to vote on them. And I've got concerns about that. I've raised issues before in relation to some of our involvement in some of these areas as part of council function. And I mean, to be honest, I think one of the biggest reasons why we have problems out there with volunteers is that we've made it too hard for them to do their job. I mean, whether you look at the health and safety requirements on community organisations, working with vulnerable children cards, all these things that make it difficult. I know we're going to have some compliance and some issues there, but I think that's one of the major issues. And from what I read of the volunteer report or plan, it didn't deal with those issues well enough. I think we need to spend a bit more time, really considering how governments have made it hard for the community to help itself. And we all know that is a major part of things. And to suggest that we need to have more staff working in that space, and my concern is that it end up with more regulations and more work for people to comply with to get things done. And then there's the issue of duplication. I mean, the state government have got a volunteer branch that are dealing with this. I mean, local government are dabbling in. I mean, the feds have probably got a volunteer organisation as well. And I think the answer to some of this stuff is not more government. When the reality is that we cause some of this stuff. And I mean, if we really want to make it easy for people to help our communities, maybe if we stop increasing our rates and stop taxing people and left that money in individuals' pockets so they could donate it to the causes that they like, or if they didn't have to work as much because they didn't have to pay as much taxes, well then they could spend a bit more time volunteering. So I have concerns about the over-governance in this space, to be honest, as well. But look, the intentions are honourable. I just don't think this is the document or the plan that's necessarily going to fix it. I hope, I'm sure I'm probably going to be the odd one out, but I hope it is. But I just had to put that on the record that more government is not always the answer.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right of reply, Alderman Warren.
Did you?
Oh, sorry, I didn't see you put your hand up, sir. Alderman Walker.
Look, thank you. I am supporting it, and I acknowledge and note some of the points raised by Alderman Newington. The answer to less government is more volunteers. would probably be how I perceive it, and a little churlish perhaps, but there's a real opportunity. This community is growing fast, and there are people from outside the community coming, there are people from interstate arriving, there are people from overseas arriving, and they can bring skills, insight and drive, which is great. And the flip side, I think, is that many of our volunteering networks are fast tracks into integrating into our community. So, always be a little bit wary of another committee or another this or another that, but volunteering is such a crucial component. The report does identify some significant potential gaps down the road, so I think maximising the utility of volunteers and looking at optimising how we get more people into the network are laudable aims, and I think that this strategy makes that more likely, not less likely. So I'd encourage other aldermen to vote along with it.
Thank you, Alderman Warren.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you, other aldermen, for your comments. I feel that Alderman Newington's conflating a number of issues that are outside the scope of this strategy. We do not have a position in this strategy on working with vulnerable children, for example. So it would be preferable to keep debate to the topic in front of us. The report clearly identified that we will need a lot of volunteers going forward, and looked at the patterns of what keeps people, what attracts people into volunteering, and noted that in particular during COVID, a lot of council areas lost volunteers because typically volunteers tend to be our older cohort, and during the pandemic most vulnerable, so they were more inclined to stay at home. But what we saw, unlike every other municipality, was that we had an increased turnout from people in a younger age group who perhaps were at home rather than at work, wanted to contribute to their community, and that was really positive for our community. And I think there are some really good approaches in here as to how we can sustain that and keep those people involved and attract other people in terms of recognising the work that our volunteers do and making it a rewarding experience for volunteers. So I do commend this strategy, the sustainability strategy for volunteers. That's the scope of it. That's what we're voting on. I commend it to my colleagues.
So the motion is that we adopt it and we reconvene the network. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried. Moving on to Alderman's question time. There are no matters on notice. Answers to previous questions at the previous council meeting in the agenda, and take those as read. Questions without notice, starting with Alderman Mulder.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I was going to give everyone a respite, but as we gallop through the latter half of the agenda for very good reasons, I picked up something that I raised at the agenda brief on Friday relating to the tree management policy. And just for the record, the policy says a tree removal, trees will not be removed because they blah, blah, blah. And although that, by way of background, I'm being a bit lengthy, I know, trees are permitted to be removed under exceptional circumstances, and it's just that the initial wording, despite the definitions and things, would appear to fetter council's decision, whereas in fact, and the policy says this, that trees can be removed.
So the question, please.
For the thing. The question is would, as part of the community consultation, would the General Manager advise of his intention to maybe tidy up those words so the trees will not be recommended for refusal because they...
I'm afraid we've now endorsed the draft policy as it is for consultation, so I don't think...
I was just putting that into the... as a consultation mechanism.
Yeah, I don't know that the General Manager's got discretion to change what we've agreed to go out. However, you have every right during the consultation to inject that very wise thought.
I think I've just done so, Mr.
Alderman Kennedy.
Yeah, just one thing I've been considering lately is when following the food van policy, what's the take-up been? I'm not quite sure who I should be directing it to, but what for permanent sites, what's the take-up been?
Can I perhaps, Mr. Toohey? Mr. Toohey, the take-up on the permanent sites for the food vans.
Oh, I understand it's 4 applications, but I'll confirm it by memo, just to make sure it's absolutely correct.
Okay, and it would be good to get an understanding, I suppose, of feedback as to whether the locations are actually correct or appealing to those people that may be considering. Not quite sure how we do that, but something to think about.
I understand that we introduced the idea for a 12-month trial and hopefully we'll get a report back. That must be nearly due, Mr. Toohey, is it? Or
it should be. I'll have to check on that.
Okay, if we can include that in the memo, please.
Yes.
Alderman Ewington. Alderman Walker.
Yes. I'm reminded, given the frequency and duration of a Hyundai that's parked in the charging bay for electric vehicles, and just wondering, have we now started charging users for the electricity, or is it still ratepayer funded at this stage?
I think it was introduced as a trial for free. I'm just wondering, Mr. Graham, are you able to help us on that?
Mr. Mayor, I'll take that one on notice and follow up to the Alderman on that one. I'll double check.
Alderman Pearce.
Thank you, Mayor. I raised trees in Bayfield Street, and I think I've got a question, but our officers, I think our staff have done a really great job. My question is, when will the centre aisle be maintained and a bit of work done there, because it really needs it?
Mr. Graham.
Through Mr. Mayor, again, I'll take that on notice. Our crew are certainly addressing the trees as a first up, and I'll ensure that I'll follow through them with the centre, but I'll advise on the timing.
Thank you. Alderman Pearce.
We've got the tree policy, and I just noticed I wonder, with the maintenance of trees, when they're in certain areas like our main streets, are we going to have a slightly different policy for that than if they're in a park out the way?
I'm not sure that our tree policy specifically addressed that, but
I'll need to just take that on notice. I can give you a considered response.
You're talking about the levels of service we provide to street trees as opposed to park trees. Thank you. Alderman Blomley. Alderman Edmonds.
Yes, I do have one. As part of the government's election promises from the last election, the local football side, Clarence was promised money for portable goalposts and portable dugouts. The club is ready to purchase these from the UK, but is awaiting final approval from the council. Could I be advised when the club can expect this approval so that it can place the order?
Mr. Graham?
That one hasn't been brought to my attention at all, so I'll follow up with my staff and find out about that one.
Perhaps you could liaise out of session with Mr. Graham and clarify that so that we can pursue it.
Yep.
Thanks.
It's a bit of scuttlebutt going around it. I hadn't heard anything, and then all of a sudden over the weekend heard it from a few people who were concerned about an extra year being added to this term of local government. Is that anything that's been raised in your discussions with the Minister?
At this stage it remains entirely academic. Aldermen be aware that the Premier has been talking about a review of local government, and that could possibly involve a change of local government areas. He's hoping to, I think is the right word, take a parliamentary approach to that, which would involve cooperation with the opposition and indeed also the Greens and the Independent, Christy Johnson. Until we know if that process is first of all going to go ahead and what shape it's going to take, it's pure speculation at this stage as to whether there's going to be an extra year or not. So we won't know anything until we understand where this review is going to take us. So it is speculation, but there's been nothing come out yet. It was raised at the LGAT general meeting, I think, but once again the same answer came out there.
Thank you.
Okay. It's been reported on the ABC too, but it's pure commentary at this stage. There are no decisions. Alderman Converter.
Thank you. I have two questions. What dates were the permits approved for the Arm End Golf Course development and the Arm End Golf Course pipeline? That's my first question.
Mr Lovell, are you able to help us there?
Through you, Mr Mayor. The golf course was approved under permit number 2015/235 in 2015. It's been extended to its maximum. It now expires on the 1st of April 2021, and there are no further extensions to the permit possible under LUPA.
Was that 21 or 22?
Sorry, 22. Beg your pardon. Was there another part of the question?
Yes, and the Arm End Golf Course pipeline.
Yeah, the pipeline permit was granted under D 2018-455, and it expires on the 26th of April 2023. One further extension to the permit is possible under the Act.
And has there been a technical substantial commencement under the permit of the Arm End Golf Course development?
Through Mr Mayor, I would say that it does not appear that substantial commencement has been achieved. Achieving this status would involve undertaking meaningful progress in accordance with the relevant permit conditions, and this would involve more than preparatory works.
Thank you.
Alderman James.
Yes, thank you. My question is to Mr Lovell, and two questions in that, unrelated, the first and the second. Anyway, Council approved the Mays Richmond development some time ago, and my question through you, Mr Mayor, to Mr Lovell. Mr Lovell, has there been any progress and discussion with the developers to adhere to the conditions of the original approval in relation to the development? And by that I mean the reduction in the height of the 8 lights and some shadowing or some sort of
baffling,
thank you, around those particular lights. So are you in a position to advise us in relation to that, please?
Through you, Mr Mayor, you didn't give me an address of the property, but I'm assuming by the sounds of it you're referring to the the Mays property. Is that? Can I confirm that?
He did mention the Mays.
Oh, did he?
Yeah.
I thought you said Mays. Oh, sorry.
Down at
Thinking of M-A-Y-S.
Yeah, sorry, no, it wasn't. It was M-A-Z-E.
Okay, so now that I understand that correctly, sorry for that. Yes, the lights were approved, I think, 6 metres in height. They were constructed at 8. They are being reduced, I understand, back to the approved 6 metres in height. Can I also say that in accordance with the permit, they will be baffled in accordance with Australian standards to ensure that light doesn't spill out onto other properties.
Thank you. Second question?
Yes, in relation to the LPS and the introduction of the statewide planning scheme, and in particular Clarence's LPS, Mr Lovell, can you advise of where we're at with the consideration by the Planning Commission in relation to two matters? First, the Acton corridor, and secondly, the Spit Farm Road proposal that was supported by this council.
Through Mr Mayor, in relation to the first matter, I can't advise you. I don't have the decision of the Commission on the LPS. We only know those things they wish to have changed, the 8 things I referred to earlier on in the meeting. We will, however, know when we get the decision on the 1st of September, and when we do that, we'll be emailing you as soon as we can a copy of that for your information. In relation to the other matter, I would need some more clarification.
Well, I'd be happy to.
Perhaps you can follow up outside the meeting. Alderman Warren.
Nothing from me, thank you.
That concludes the open session of Council. Can I thank the members of the public that have stayed with us online, and close the feed, please.